Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inner Voice podcast. It is so great to be with you today. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist and author, originator of the awareness integration theory. A heartfelt chat is about what matters most in our life, our mind, thoughts, feelings, actions, relationships, and our fulfillment in this beautiful journey of life. Many of you have asked about the awareness integration theory. For all the therapists and coaches, I want you to know that our this year, our training is starting again. And the first training on the essentials of the awareness integration theory will be in February 10th and 12th, 10th through 12th, Friday through Saturday. You're going to get 20 credits, 20 hours of credit. People who are a therapist and marriage and family therapist in California, you will get a CEU with CAMP, California Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. And your early bird registration is 20th of January. So you still got 2 weeks. And you'll have a discount. I love to see you there. It's going to be online. People from all over the world, therapists and coaches, join us. And I love for you to be with us. And this is a 3-day working on different aspects and learning all the 9 principles and 6 interventions of this multidisciplinary and multimodal model that we've done a lot of amazing research on it, and it has minimized depression and anxiety, raises self-esteem, self-efficacy, and self-agency. I'm teaching it in California, Long Beach, and we're looking at it from therapeutic, from a coaching, and from educational perspective. So also, if you become a certified therapist and a coach in the awareness integration model, you will be part of the group that is going to be on the Foojan app, which is launching in a couple of weeks. And we'll have this model into the app. So most people who do self-help work on deep level are going to need some help from outside to really deepen their work. So this is an amazing opportunity for you to be able to get certified in this model. Today in this episode, I chat with Jason Sheirs. He is a certified psychotherapist and transformative coach who has gone through the entire journey from childhood trauma to addictions and mental health problems to jail, psychiatric care, 12-step recovery, and becoming a professional helping others. His story is painful but eye-opening, showing how the system pathologizes normal human responses to tragic life circumstances and shows how there is a way out for everyone. He found the Infinite Recovery Project, which helped people see the perfect mental health within that resides in all human beings. And this is a psycho-spiritual approach that helps people see that all experience happens within. It allows people to drop the story and suffer and see what is possible. Jason is also a podcast host of Misunderstandings of the Mind podcast, a conversational show that is truly transformative and will meet you where you are, give you a clearer view of how the mind works, and help you see past your psychology and any diagnoses you may have received. So you could go to misunderstandingsofthemind.com to connect with Jason Sheirs and his podcast and his work. So in this episode, we share the process of being whole to separated and then whole again by being present at the moment with all of you. Subscribe to this podcast, my YouTube channel, and connect with me through my website, foojanzeine.com, or any of the social media. Get my book, Life Reset, The Awareness Integration Path to the Life You Want. And that is a self-help book, or Awareness Integration Therapy, which is for therapists and coaches, or Intentional Parenting, which takes AIT to different ages of your children. And really, if you're working with children or you have a child, that book is really great for you. I love to hear from you. That's what I want you to know. I love to hear from you. So share with me your comments and all. So without further ado, here's Jason Sheirs, all the way from UK. Well, hello, Jason Sheirs. It is so nice to have you all the way from UK.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to, I always say I'm looking forward to hearing what I'm going to say because I don't know. I don't know.
I know. Isn't that wonderful? It's like, we're just going to have a fun dialogue. And I'm sure if the two of us enjoy each other's conversation and learn from each other, that everybody who's with us is going to have the same thing. I enjoy conversation and learning from, these interviews every day. There's something that I learn. And I know that you have been going through all sides of, let's say, mental health. You've gone through your own experience, as well as many of us go through experiences, but you have been diagnosed, you've been medicated, you've been shedding off things, you've been looking at your own strength, and you've created a perspective and a model to support people looking at their strength. So share with us your own journey that got you here, and then we'll go through what you've got and what you're offering to everyone else who's might be going through similar things.
Yeah, it's kind of a long journey. I'll try and kind of make the major points, but like my journey started when I was just 5 years old and I lost my dad in a tragic accident. He left the house one day when I was just 5 and he never came back. He was killed in an accident. And ever since then, I guess I lost my dad physically and I lost my mum emotionally because she struggled to cope with it. So, I always say, what was my childhood like? It was really like work it out yourself. That's what it was like. I was left to work it out. So it was kind of loveless from a child point of view. And as all human beings have innate resilience, built-in resilience, we find a way to cope. We find a way to be okay, as I did. And food was my coping mechanism, my first coping mechanism. So food became my friend. It became my emotional support. It became reliable, consistent. It did what it said every time. I could rely on it. It's like, so food, and with the consumption of mass amounts of food to cope with internal experience comes a huge weight gain too. So, like there was the external manifestation of what I was putting into my body, and then my mum's attempt to fix that, like what's going on with Jason, no thoughts about grief or anything, and she did what anyone would do. She found a way to get help, in the form of psychiatry at the time, because that was all she knew. And so by the time I was 9 years old, I was massive in weight, like for my age and size. And they took me to the psychiatrist. I was diagnosed with depression and put on antidepressants. And there was no mention of grief. There was no mention of trauma or any of those things. But that was in the early 80s. It's kind of like nobody really understood those things as we do today. Like there was no trauma-informed practitioners, or anything like that. So it was really just what was presenting and kind of like how to fix that. And from there, it was like an attempt to control the external, the weight gain. It's kind of like, so put onto diet pills, and medication to control my appetite, because that looked like it was the problem. We're always like dealing with things at a behavioral level here, and as in my childhood, and my internal experience was horrific. Being me, was very painful and very challenging. Being overweight, feeling full of shame and full of grief, because of the loss of my dad, and lost and alone in the world was kind of what was going on inside of me, but nobody really knew that. Mm-hmm. So then after all the psychiatry stuff and the special schools and the inpatient units at a young age, it's kind of like in medications, it was drugs came along and it was just the obvious thing for me. So drug addiction took over for the next 10 years, from an early teenager to early 20s. I was struggled with everything, you know, from heroin addiction to all sorts of other drugs, and anything really I could take that would find me oblivion from my internal experience. And like, you know, like it makes complete sense, right? I mean, it's kind of like if we always find a way to be okay and our internal experience is very challenging, then we find a way to soothe ourselves. You know, it's like if you look at drugs from that perspective, then like if we live in a self-correcting model, like the body heals itself, right? You cut your finger, it heals itself. You put food in your mouth, it digests itself. You break your leg, it fixes itself. There's nothing you need to do, right? It's kind of like the same way that if the mind gets overly busy and kind of like appears to be a difficult place to be in, then it finds a way to soothe itself, you know. And it's like drugs from that place look like innate wisdom rather than something that needs to be pathologized as a disease or something like that, you know, or a diagnosis or a label. So that's what I did. You know, I found a way to escape my internal experience with drugs. And then when drugs were taken away, I went back to food because food was socially acceptable. Drugs were no longer an option because my life was full of jails and institutions and crime and chaos. You know, for those 10 years, I did anything I could to get drugs and escape myself until I could no longer do it anymore, until it was just like I was tired of being arrested. I was tired of going to jail. I was tired of living in homeless shelters and on the streets and all those things. So the only reason I stopped taking drugs was it was just too tiring. You know, it was just too much. And I found freedom via the 12 steps at the time, you know, which was really a godsend at the time, because it was like I was on self-destruct. You know, it probably wouldn't have lasted much longer, you know, the way it was. And from there, you know, it's like I really just adopted a new belief that I had this. I never questioned anything. Someone told me I had this disease called addiction and it was unfixable, and that I had to abstain one day at a time, and that if I abstained one day at a time from drugs and alcohol and did this long list of practices, then I would be okay. You know, it's like I didn't know I was already okay. I'd always been okay, because I was living in the internal experience. You know, it's like I didn't see myself from a neutral point of view. I was deeply reflective of, you know, thinking that I was this traumatized young child that had kind of lived in an adult's body that could never escape this tragic loss. So I took on that new belief and I went to 12-step meetings for the next 2 decades, you know, and yeah, I stayed clean from drugs, you know, but my internal experience got worse again. You know, I felt very alone in the world. So the mental health stuff carried on, the food addiction carried on, and I would just go to meetings and smile and say everything was great, you know, because I wasn't taking drugs anymore, you know, and I belonged to something. And that's when I got into psychotherapy and all the other stuff, the personal development stuff, and, you know, Western psychological trainings and Eastern spiritual kind of pursuits, you know, I was on that quest to find out who I was and what was going on. And it seemed like a good idea to become a psychotherapist, because I thought if I could work that out, then, you know, if I could help other people, then I could help myself. But at the end of all those years and years of trainings with a long list of qualifications and sort of letters after my name and degrees and different diplomas and different qualifications, I kind of sat one day and thought, well, I'm not happy. You know, I'm not happy. And how can I help anyone else be happy? You know, and I thought, actually, I know a lot of therapists and they're not happy too either. You know, it's kind of like they can put the front on, you know, it's like in the spotlight, for example, in the media, but like the truth, you know, when you really know people, when they tell you what they're struggling with behind the scenes, you know, it's kind of like, I thought that doesn't really seem like the peaceful life or the joyful life that I'm looking for. You know, there was still a lot of escapism going on amongst the people that I knew. And it seems like for many of us that struggle with addiction, once we get clean, it seems like the only thing we think we can do is become a counselor or a therapist, because it seems easy and we've lived this sort of troubled life. And that's what a lot of people did. But I was never satisfied with that. I kind of So I kept searching. I had this thing, everyone said to me, you need to stop seeking. You need to stop seeking. You need to stop searching, because when you stop seeking, then you'll be satisfied with your life. But seeking is actually, what I call our intuition's knowing of home, that there's something more than this. I don't think anyone should give up seeking. I think if you're seeking, what you're really seeking is yourself, home within yourself. But many of us have never been pointed there. We don't know that. We don't know how to find ourselves. It's kind of like, it just seems like an abstract Eastern concept to go and find yourself, like something that people go to India for, or something like that, or Nepal, or go and live in a monastery or something like that. And I didn't know what it meant either. People used to say to me, it's kind of like, you need to look within. And I would be saying, well, what does that, whereabouts, where do I look? It's kind of like, what is it I'm looking for exactly? It just sounded kind of abstract and couldn't make any sense of that. So, but I never gave up, I never gave up. There was that part of me that, I guess there was one part of me that was resigned, like to living this destructive, traumatized victim story, like that played out in our relationships, destructive and toxic relationships, and the relationship with food, my obsession with the gym, and while I was clean with pornography and sex and relationships and everything, it's like. But then there was another part of me that never gave up, and that was the knowing, the knowing that there was something more than what I had, So it was like this two sides of the same coin, I guess, And I did all of Tony Robbins's courses, it was like, I thought, well, maybe the personal development rather than the therapy side of things, the coaching versus therapy type thing is the way to go. So I did all this, and it was like all about hustling more and grinding more and getting more businesses, and I'd been outwardly quite successful at this point, it's like, but that still hadn't made me happy. So I was doing all the Tony Robbins, getting up earlier, doing more work, working 18-hour days, running myself into the ground, trying to make myself a better version of me, because that was kind of what I felt was being taught, in that work. And it felt just overwhelming. There was so much to do, and just to be okay, to find this better version of myself. And amongst all this, I'd kind of I joined this personal development group where we shared resources and stuff. And I came across this video by chance called The Path of Effortless Change, and I thought, oh, I just love the word effortless. I just straight away, it's like, please, give me something in my life that's effortless, anything just to free me from this. Like every day was effort, every day was striving, every day was a challenge, even from the days of drug addiction, of waking up and going committing a crime, and to going selling something just to get money, just to buy drugs, just to feel okay, to the life that I had now that was like full of getting up early, trying to earn more, trying to start more businesses, trying to look outwardly successful. It was just like, oh, God, like somebody give me an easy day, God. So yeah, this course by Michael Neal, it was, who became my coach, for a few years, and I did his trainings in LA called Super Coach Academy, and I watched this video, and it was like a serendipitous moment, because I didn't watch it thinking, oh, this is gonna, like be the one that helps me feel better, but I watched it just to be able to share it with these other people that in this group that I was in this personal development group. And I didn't even plan, but I just found myself mesmerized by it. I was kind of like, I don't even know what this guy's actually saying, but like there's something in it that's really speaking to me, And a year later, I ended up at his house in LA for a course, and I just had this, over 2 days, I had this realization that everything was okay. It had always been okay. It's like I'd seen the thought created story that I lived in. I'd seen the victim story, I'd seen the survivor story, I'd seen the addict story. I saw them all as stories created via thought that I lived in and suffered from and escaped from myself on a daily basis, that they weren't who I was. Fundamentally, I was okay. I'd always been okay. And yet I'd lived in the feeling of my thinking, my whole life. I'd lived in the story. Every day I'd woke up and I believed I was this damaged person that had to do all these things in order to be okay. And it was like a domino effect. It was it's what I call an awakening or a realization, to the truth of who we are, seeing beyond the conceptual Western psychological theories, which I'd been trained in, as a therapist, like of brokenness, of the model of illness, and all the years and years of psychiatry and labels and eating disorders and addiction stuff. It just all fell away. It was just like I can't think of a good metaphor, but it was like parts of me were just crumbling away and just disappearing, and it's like the labels were falling off. I was just realizing what was seeing what was true by seeing what was not true. That's not true. That's not true. That's not true. That can't be true. It's just seeing that there was no truth in any of these things. They were kind of helpful at the time, the labels, maybe for a momentary kind of respite from my own experience, but in the long term I'd adopted them as part of my identity, and that was the part that's not helpful with our current psychiatric and psychological systems, is that like people take on these labels and think it's part of their identity and that they can never be fixed. It's part of who they are, unless as I had done. So I became free. I just really freed myself from all those experiences, and I started being more curious about life again, about myself, about who am I really? What do I like? It was like waking up from a bad dream, or a nightmare, so to speak. It was like I became aware of nature, of the birds, of the green grass, of the sounds, and it was like wow, where have I been for like 40 years? It's kind of like I've been asleep in this dreamlike state. It's kind of like, which I believe is where most of humanity is lost, in this relationship with themselves, as a separate entity in this big bad world where they have to fight for themselves at all times. And I started to see the oneness of everything, the connection of the interconnectedness and the spiritual intelligence behind everything. And from there, I saw all the tragedy and all the experiences as divine, in a way. They were all pointing me somewhere, they were pointing me home, they were pointing me back to myself, and I think that's what's going on with all suffering. It's like life is always giving us what we want, but we resist it, in a way, and then there's suffering involved, because we keep resisting, where life is trying to point us to. And I saw the divinity in all the experiences that I'd had, even in the tragedy, even in the loss of my dad, that it was such a gift, that had kind of eventually, even though it was a painful experience, eventually it kind of pointed me to the truth of who I was back inside, to see that I was always okay, even though I'd lived this life of suffering for perhaps 4 decades, and that's really what I saw as what became the core of my work, helping people see what's right with them versus seeing what, like as I'd lived in the experience of, everyone giving me a new label and finding out what was wrong with me and saying that I'd never be fixed, I'd never be healed, I'd never, I'd never live a happy life. I'd always be suffering. I'd always be on some sort of medication or dealing with something or having to practice something in order to be okay. But in my work, it's really helping people see that there's nothing to do to be okay. You're already okay. Everything is okay. And it's like, and not getting so caught up in the experience of it, but seeing where it's actually pointing us to. All the struggling was always pointing me to look back inwardly. It's like there was a longing in me. I mean, it makes sense from a trauma sort of point of view, there was a longing in me for, the loss of my dad and the loss of my mum too, so it kind of showed up in obsessively chasing relationships where there was unavailability or looking for feminine closeness and softness, because I never had that as a child. It's kind of like I'm craving that and longing for that, but getting exactly the opposite, because that was what was installed in me in the traumatic experience that I had as a child, all completely unknowingly to me, and played out unconsciously in my life. But I started to see this, you know, as I started to see the story and see the truth and start to be with my experience, be present in the moment now with whatever was coming, you know, there was lots of tears and lots of pain and lots of struggling, and what it came was a real ability just to be present, you know, with whatever came in the moment, you know, and that's all the healing that came after the awakening experience, you know. That's kind of brings me, I guess, there's so much more that happened and so many more things that happened, but it was really it's really been a beautiful experience, you know, of kind of meeting myself, you know.
Yes, I can sense that. I mean, I went through the psychotherapy mode plus the coaching mode simultaneously. So I really experienced myself some of the conversations that you're having and the path that you've gone through. One thing that is very important with what you said is that although we need compassion and empathy from the side of us which is wounded, it's important for us not to go through the path of I'm a victim and stay in the victimized position. Yes, everybody gets victimized at one point in life, but I think that, you know, the message that I'm a victim of life and will always be a victim of life because of something that has happened to me, it puts us in a position that the same, you know, we have to find some sort of coping mechanism to consistently, you know, feel power, where the message to ourselves is always that I will always be powerless. So there's this concept of getting to a place of knowing that, yes, there's so many things in the world I am powerless against, and there's so many things in the world, or there are areas that I can be powerful. And internally, I'm always powerful, but there's circumstances that truly I will always be powerless against. And you know, the notion of that I'm going to be in power with everything is not accurate. I'm in power of how to be with anything, but there are many times that I'm going to be powerless against whatever shows up out there. And I can sense where you've gone through the process of, you know, systematically healing yourself, and there's a beauty in the process. The beauty is there. It doesn't mean that you don't go through the ups and downs and the pain and the joy and, you know, the gratitude, and then you fall right into the pain again. And yes, it's like, you know, hiking somewhere, you're going to go up, you're going to go down. Sometimes it's going to be easier, sometimes it's going to be harder. But the path of almost like finding the self and then enjoying the self. And I know that when our trauma is very young, we haven't found the self anyway yet because our ego state are not there to find it. And then we find it. It's almost like we recognize ourselves as someone with pain versus what you finally came toward, which is, no, there's a beauty inside. All is well inside. It's not that myself is a pain. It's the beauty, and then pain is on top of it. It's like a beautiful diamond which has got crust on top of it, and all we need to do is to, you know, kind of like get the crust out, and then the shine shows up. So that's what I was hearing, and kind of relating it to what I had gone through the path to get to where I am today. So thank you for sharing that. So I'm with your progression of this, I'm sensing that you also work with your clients to bring them to see who they are and kind of like taking off the labels, right? One of the things you said, and I recall, I had gone obviously through a lot of healing with psychotherapy, and then I went to like Landmark and some of the other courses, Tony Robbins and Landmark and all of it. And I remember working with one of the coaches, and I kept going through and, you know, going through crying and going through, and then the coach looked at me like, why is she in psychotherapist? And she's been a psychotherapist for so long, and she can't even, you know, she's still in the victim. And it kind of like that way of being was such a mirror to me, where I looked at, you know, as long as you look at the same thing over and over and over and over from a trauma perspective, and again, it doesn't mean that we don't have compassion and we don't need to heal the trauma, But the point is, even after healing the trauma, if we keep coming back to it with the same view, we're always going to produce the same emotions because it's the same story. You know, when you keep going to a horror story, you're going to keep creating the same emotions. And the same, you know, what I was hearing from you, it's like shifting the perspective of what you said, which is they're all a story I made up, and how I can be with the story I make up. And if I made up that story, I can rewrite the story. I can dismantle the story. I can dismantle the beliefs I created. It gives a sense of freedom then to be whoever you need to be and find the essence of you.
Yeah.
These were all the things that showed up for me as you were talking.
Yeah, no, it's a very important distinction for me to make. And it's like when I work with people, it's really about, I want people to understand their true nature before we talk about trauma. Because what I find is that the Western psychiatric and psychological models, in a way, are iatrogenic. You know, they perpetuate the belief system, you know, about trauma. And like you said, when we coming from either victim or survivor, because both of them are just stories, you know, none of them are true nature. It's like when I'm a survivor, I'm like, yeah, I overcame that, you know, that bad thing that happened. When I'm a victim, I'm like, oh my God, you know, I'm a victim to that bad thing that happened. It's all a story. So when we're seeing that happened, you know, it's kind of like, and I was affected by it and I'm okay. Yeah, I have these visceral residual responses of the nervous system that happen in the body without the story, you know, like, so unless I understand my true nature, I'm going to perpetuate the story because I've took on some psychological or psychiatric belief about how trauma affects me, and it's permanent, it's in the nervous system, it's how certain things show up for me. When I see that all that is in service, you know, in service of me experiencing love in the moment, the love of life, the love and connection with other people, you know, it's like it's all pointing me home. And when I've experienced my true nature, when I see that I'm not a victim or survivor, something happened, you know, I was affected by it, and there's a part of me that cannot be damaged, cannot be touched, cannot be scratched, is unbreakable, is permanent there. My mental health, you know, is always there. It cannot be taken away from me. When I see that, then I can explore the trauma responses of the body that happen. You know, it's kind of like sometimes, you know, if you look at Carl Jung, you know, like he said, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your whole life and you'll call it fate. You know, it's kind of like, then I'm aware that I'm okay and I have this perfect place of mental health in me. You know, it's like, and I'm no longer telling the story yet. There's times when there's external stimulus, relationship, people, judgment, you know, money, things that are happening that trigger this contraction in the body, you know, which then I have a lot of thinking about and then I have a reaction to, but I've not seen it in my mind. It's not come up as a thought-based belief. It's actually a response of the body. I can explore that from there, but until I really know that there's a part in me that's okay, what my true nature is, I'm so susceptible to going down the trauma rabbit hole that's kind of pushed on people innocently by well-meaning practitioners, you know, in the psychological and psychiatric world that were like I was when I was a new psychotherapist, when I hadn't discovered my true nature, and I really thought people were broken and I was broken too, and we were all broken and we would never be fixed, you know?
Yes. So you brought a very, very good point. I mean, I've worked with addiction for 30 years. I consider myself an addict. Food. Cigarettes and food, and come from an extreme childhood trauma too. So I've experienced what you're sharing with me. I can't say the same, but you know, I experienced my own experience relating to what you said. There's also this part of how you're saying it that it works, which is we dissociate, you know, we kind of like separate ourselves. So you met another part of you who went to create the crime and get everything. And then you met the other part of you, which, you know, and these parts are first, you know, as we grow, as we're born, they're kind of like we're a whole, and then we keep getting separated. And as you go through the process, I hear you come back to this whole, you bring all the other parts of you back. into a wholeness versus these separate parts, which we do when we get we go through addiction. It's this, you know, dissociated part, because you could see, like, I could say anything or sit down for 5 minutes and go through all the things that I need to be going through, and then another part shows up, hijacks, like absolutely hijacks the brain and the behavioral process, and you find yourself suddenly in a whole different scenario, and then you got to get yourself back. And there's this, you know, there's like two parts that are constantly even in war within the self, not only with the world but within the self. And what I'm hearing in your journey is to bring them all back, let go of the dissociation and the wholeness, and bringing present moment here and now, and healing all that space. Is that accurate in what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, it sounds like what you're pointing to is really permission to be you, whatever that is. You know, it's kind of like in the present moment now, what is happening with you? You know, it's kind of like what is happening in your body right now. I mean, because we've only ever got the present moment. We experience the past in the present moment. We experience the future in the present moment, you know, in our thinking created experience of the past and our thinking created experience of the future. You know, that's all we can ever experience. So like, when we invite and give permission to everything to be present, whatever that is it anger, is it dissociation, is it irritation, is it restless legs, is it happening, is it happening in the body, or is it thought-based happening in the mind? You know, it's kind of like, my favorite saying is, all of you is welcome, whatever that is. You know, it's kind of, and rather than, you know, like psychology in a way complicates, you know, like, and spirituality simplifies the experience of being human, you know, and I to me, a good healing process brings both together. It sees the value of both the psychological and the spiritual being the true nature, who we are, the part of us that's undamaged, unbreakable, and the psychological often how we became in our childhood and what we experience and how that plays out in our present day relationships. And what you were saying was really about like that, you know, what is a spiritual aspect, what I call innate resilience, you know, the way that we find a way to be okay in any circumstances. That's what we learn, right, in the traumatic responses, unknowingly, unconsciously. As children, we find a way to be okay in adverse circumstances, and then those very things are the things that become challenges in our adult relationships, the very thing that block us exactly from what we want. You know, it's like, so it's, yeah, it's like you said, being with all parts of ourselves, whatever is showing up, you know, seeing that it's all a calling to love, it's all a longing for love, it's all a longing to reconnect with ourselves. You know, it's on a behavioral level, it's a pointless place to look, you know, because the behavior is just hiding something that's happening in the core and the spiritual understanding of who we are. You know, we've took on a belief system, perhaps from processes and things that we've done, or we're having a traumatic response to some sort of stimulus, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what is the experience that you have when the present moment is here and the wholeness is experienced, which is very different from the victimized position, from the pain and separateness?
Yeah, I mean, it can be whatever shows up, you know. It can be full of anger and disconnection and loneliness, or it can be full of beauty and joy and connection. You know, it really is about being with what is, you know, without a meaning, because there's no meaning to those things. They are just experience. They're energy that comes through the body, you know, that's experienced in a certain way. And then the meaning has been applied. What the meaning is, the knowledge, the thing that we've learned about them, you know, like the meaning that we've given them. So actually all of them, you know, are not good or bad. You know, that's just one of the things that we do as humans, to characterize stuff, to try and find solutions, to fix, to call some things good and some things bad, and the things that are bad, we need to find solutions and fix and make better. You know, that's just part of the human experience. But really seeing that there's no meaning, you know, there is no meaning, there's nothing wrong, you know, it's kind of like, it's just the meaning that we've given stuff. So often for me, you know, like dissociation was and withdrawal and shutdown and resignation was my default because of the loss, of my dad. It was kind of like and the fact that, I went through addiction. I lived in adversity. I lived in violence and crime and prisons and stuff. So I found a way to be okay in the most challenging places, so it was really easy for me to be in relationships and completely dissociate, be disconnected and be okay, like, well, I'm okay. So there's a shadow side to self-sufficiency, it's kind of like, is that like longing for connection, but just going, I'm okay, like longing for connection, longing for love, longing for intimacy, but going, I'm okay, it's like, because that's what I learned to do. And it was much easier to say I'm okay than to be vulnerable and go, I really need something here,
Well, and you have to be okay in those spaces. Like, in order to survive and move forward, you got to be okay. And the other side of it is you are okay. That's what you're saying, that you are okay. It's just that there is also a place for vulnerability, that if we could create the safety inside of ourselves to hear our own vulnerability and not push it away and not be afraid of our own vulnerability.
Yeah, and as a man, I mean, I've just started a men's group, and as a man, that's kind of like, there's a lot of toxic beliefs about masculinity, it's like about what it means to be masculine, what it means to be a man, it's like, and what it means to show up, to provide, all the things that have kind of like have been generational trauma that's been passed down, and kind of with the current social media offerings, YouTube and all the videos, and people doing men's work, things under the guise of men's work, which are really just their own beliefs about masculinity, how to be more masculine, how to show up better, how to do more, how to provide more. None of it is really about how to be your authentic self, or it's okay to be vulnerable, it's like, it's okay to whatever that is, or, like I said, all of you is welcome here, from a man's point of view. It's like, so that's why I love that work, because it really never felt okay to be me, it never felt safe to be me. It never felt, and I've been to many funerals, over the years, of people that could just never say that, they just found it easier to take their own life than they did to really be with their vulnerability, so going back to the, I can't remember where I was.
Jason, I want to share with you that I really appreciate what you just said about men and vulnerability. And I want to add that I think we have the same thing with women's vulnerability, because it's been experienced that if women stay in their vulnerability, they're either going to be controlled by men or they're going to be abused by men. So then they also lose their vulnerability and become like, they shift into their own masculine side and like hostile side. So I appreciate what you said about both genders, or, non-genders, and any human being to have the experience of their vulnerability plus their strength, and having both of them be there, the resilience be side by side by their vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's like, it's really about whatever is present in the moment, and I guess what I was going to say was I love to be connected to my body. So for me, sadness and being connected to my feelings is currently, and has been for a long time, a gift to me, where I'm not afraid to show my feelings, because, I was so disconnected from my body for so long. I just lived as a walking head, it's kind of like, that was it. Anyone would say, how do you feel? My answer would be, I think I feel, I don't know. The truth was, I just didn't know. I had no idea. What do you feel? Where do you feel it? What are emotions? Where do they come? Because I just learned to disconnect as a way of safety, and I embrace that, today. It feels good to be connected to my emotional side, and to sort of be present with that, whatever it is, without any shame of showing up, without any ideas about masculinity, about what I should be and what I shouldn't be, and really knowing, just having that instinctive knowing that who I am, is enough,
In 1 minute, anything we haven't said that you really want everybody to know?
Oh, just any minute I get, I would take it to say to men, don't suffer alone. Don't be the strong, silent type. There's so much beauty available in life, than suffering alone. And, just to share and to speak, just to be open to show up and speak to somebody with an open heart, that's willing to hear you and to be present with you and not give you advice and tell you how to be, but just to witness you, being vulnerable. That's the biggest gift. So to any men suffering, find that person,
Beautiful. Jason Shire, everyone. Jason, how could people find you?
My addiction treatment program is called the Infinite Recovery Project, and my website, wideworldcoaching.com. And also I have a podcast that has conversations like this, kind of really looking at true nature, called Misunderstandings of the Mind. Many beautiful conversations with different people on all sorts of subjects: relationships, mental health, connection, depression, anxiety, addiction, all sorts of stuff, which is great.
Beautiful. And what is the website to go to?
Misunderstandingsofthemind.com.
Misunderstandingsofthemind.com. Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed our conversation and are related to it so much.
Thank you.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.